Don't need to behave here, and I don't ever wanna miss a moment or a kiss. No, I just wanna be with you, and we don't ever have to leave. We just need to believe that paradise was made for us too. Swim even deeper in the ocean. I'll take your hand, I'll pull you closer in slow motion. We're floating away, no motion, all emotion, yeah. And I don't ever wanna miss a moment or a kiss. No, I just wanna be with you, and we don't ever have to leave. We just need to believe that paradise was made for us too.
Yes, we need to wait for 11 minutes because my team is just
that paradise was made for us too.
I just came in earlier to see
okay.
everything works okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes. See you soon.
To everything I've lost. Been thinking all night long, 1,000 times too much. My heart is hollow ever since you took away tomorrow. Empty like a cup that's broken. Sweet solitude, so close to you. My lost soul will follow where you go. Thousand times too much. We still got so much time, but we ran out of luck. My heart is hollow ever since you took away tomorrow. Empty like a cup that's broken. Sweet solitude, so close to you. We'll follow where you go. We'll follow where you go. We'll follow where you go. Endless holiday, I'll be your escape. Dancing in the sun, no, we're just having fun. Oh, you belong to me, like I belong to you. Everything is cool. I was sitting by the pool, sipping on tequilas, gorgeous senoritas, toast beneath the sand. Another drink in my hand, salt is in the air and sand is in my hair. Palm trees swaying in the breeze, oh, life just is at ease. Take me away. Take me away. Take me away to better days. I'll be around the start of the day. Let's have some fun under the sun. I'll be around the start of the scent, another drink in my hand. Salt is in the air and sand is everywhere. Palm trees swaying in the breeze. Life just is at ease. Take me away to better days. I'll be around inside the day. Let's have some fun under the sun. I'll be around inside the day. Endless holiday, endless holiday, endless holiday, endless holiday. Take me away to better days. I'll be around inside the day. Endless holiday.
Maybe I just wanted something different this time, different this time. 'Cause baby, I just need your loving every night, every night. I need you, you, you. I need you, you, you. Oh, I need you. Maybe I just wanted something different this time, different this time. 'Cause baby, I just need your loving every night, every night. I need you, you, you. I need you, you, you. Oh, I need you. I need you.
I've never felt this warm in the winter, with your body next to me. Nowhere to go, pull up the sheets. You don't have to leave. You're like hot chocolate, won't be leaving your room tonight. You're like hot chocolate, sweet and you melt the ice. You're like hot chocolate.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sorry, can you hear my voice? Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back with us, the Master and Mistress of Ceremony, who will accompany you with our fourth speaker. And before we introduce our moderator, we, as the MC, would like to inform you that there will be attendance taken, which will be requirement for your certificate.
Okay, now I want to continue with my partner. So you are required to have and save a screenshot with the presenter with your camera on during session 4, which Karen said under the PhD, and the attendance link will be shared at the end of the session during the fourth speaker session with Miss Karen.
Baik, kami akan mengingatkan kepada kalian untuk menyimpan screenshot bersama pembicara kedua kami, yaitu Laura N. Winter, dan pembicara keempat, yaitu Jacqueline Sarah Unduraga, dan link kehadiran akan dibagikan pada akhir sesi bersama speaker keempat kami.
Now, without further ado, we will like to present our moderator first. So the fourth speaker will be guided by our great moderator, Mr. Muhammad Afifuddin Ghazali, SPD MPD Counts CR. So before that, we would like to introduce Mr. Afif. So Mr. Muhammad Afifuddin Ghazali, I'm so sorry, SPDM Counts GR, was born in Jombang on May 22, 1995, and is a lecturer at Surabaya State University. And over the past 5 years, he has taught 22 courses, conducted 9 community service projects, and published 16 scientific articles in journal, and has obtained 38 intellectual property rights. Now, after we get to know our moderator a little bit, we would like to present the golden time. So, Mr. Afif, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Arya and Naswa, for the introduction. That's really lovely for you. Okay, so it's really an honor for me that we will have a distinguished keynote speaker from University of Edinburgh, who is Dr. Karen Sarah Unduraga. Dr. Jacqueline Karen Sarah Unduraga, that will present to us related with the decolonial perspective of Western counseling. Specifically, she will talk a lot about the challenging of the psychotherapy, counseling and psychotherapy to be a university and generally ability. Moreover, I would like to introduce Dr. Karen. Jacqueline Karen Serra Unduraga is a Chilean relational and experiential psychotherapist currently practicing as a volunteer in a Scottish charity. She works as a lecturer in counseling and psychotherapy at the University of Edinburgh. In her research, Karen is currently interested in how the insidious presence of neocolonialism and neoliberalism make itself present in how we make sense of and orientate ourselves and our life. She is also working with the participatory methodologies to understand the experience of undergraduate students of color at the university. Previously, she has worked on reconceptualizing reflexivity as ways of relating to oneself that generates subjectivities and words, offering performative, meta-reflective as a tool. So before I hand it over to Dr. Karen, hello, Dr. Karen. Good morning, Dr. Karen.
Good morning.
Okay, I hope you have a wonderful day in Scotland because I think it is 8:30, right? In
Yes, yes,
Scotland?
yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, as a note, it is already 2:30 in Surabaya, Indonesia.
Yes, yeah, we have
Okay.
difference.
Okay. Anyway, how are you, Dr. Karen?
Good, good. Happy to be here.
Good. Okay, so everything will be good. So can I hand it over to you to present?
Yes, yes.
Okay, please,
I,
Dr. Karen, the time is fully yours.
thank you. I'll try to share my slides. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Great. So if I press this, you see the whole thing, right?
No, I just see your beautiful face in here.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Yeah.
Do you see it there?
Yes, yes, I see the full version of it.
And let me see. For moving it, I move it like this, I think.
Yes, yes. I can see it.
Mhm. Let me see what I can do with this. Right. Okay. Just moving some things around. Okay.
Ah,
Great to be here. Great to start, and also great to be able to see some faces. I thought at the beginning that I wasn't going to be able to see faces, so that's really great so that I can see you while am speaking. And please, if you have a question or you have a comment or something, just let me know. I'm not sure, like I am not great, I think, with Zoom. But if I don't see like a hand or something, maybe Muhammad, you can help me so that
sure,
we
sure,
can
sure.
be on the same
Yeah,
page.
I'm here to help you along with that.
Great, great, super. Um, right. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So, the presentation today is about challenging counseling aspirations to neutrality and universality. And before coming here, I was speaking with Muhammad about my presentation, and he was telling me that he was quite surprised of having kind of this more challenging perspective to Western counseling. Also because I'm working from the West, right, from the UK. But the idea is to try to question this idea of only needing to follow a Western model of counseling, and also being able to criticize it and to see how much of it can actually be helpful for counseling, for example, in Indonesia, or how much can be even unhelpful. Okay, so that's kind of the core aspect. So for a starting point, I wanted to think about how therapy is nowadays really popular. I'm not sure how it is in Indonesia, how popular it's there, but in English-speaking nations like the UK, the States, or Australia, it's quite popular. And I think that it's one of the main ways in which people think that they can address psychic
Recording
suffering.
in progress.
And because of that, like when someone is feeling bad, or when someone is feeling sad, or when someone is feeling kind of a lot of anxiety, the main solution that is given to them is, why don't you go to therapy? So my question is, was that always in this way? Like, was psychotherapy always so popular and so generic? But it wasn't in that way in the English-speaking nations. So between the 1930s and 80s, the welfare state was more present, like I'm doing like a generalization. So counseling was offered through large state institutions, and it was offered for very particular problems, for example, for teenage pregnancy. So counseling didn't have the spread that it has just now, and that it's helpful for anyone. But since the 1980s, with also the rise of neoliberalism, counseling has become much more popular and generic. So now everybody wants to go to counseling. And well, I'm putting all the references there. The Rose in particular speaks about how contemporary liberal, democratic, and capitalist societies go hand in hand with the rise of what he calls C disciplines. And by C disciplines, he means psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, all the C ones. So he traces how whenever there is a society that is of this type, like liberal, democratic, and capitalist, the rise of the C disciplines goes hand in hand with that. So they go up at the same time. So he thinks about how C disciplines help these capitalist societies and the other way around. And he thinks about how C disciplines help to locate in the person and not in society the root of their suffering. So, for example, if someone has anxiety, psychotherapy will try to go to what this person, what are their patterns of thinking, or what are their way of dealing with anxiety, or maybe how has it been the relationship with their parents, and how that has shaped now their problems with anxiety, instead of thinking about the social roots of this anxiety. That may be, for example, a job instability or a crisis in the country can affect the feelings of a person. But C disciplines in general leave that to the side way and focus more on the individual or on the individual and their intimate relationships. So Rose thinks that that this kind of focus on the individual helps capitalism as well, right? Because capitalism also focuses on the individual and on this notion of success, that if you try hard enough, you will achieve things, like the idea of the American dream, for example, right? That you just need your own effort, and without thinking about how society privileges certain populations and underprivileges other populations. So the main approaches to counseling in the UK, I will say, is the person-centered approach, the psychodynamic approach, and the integrative approach. I'm not including here the CBT, for example, because I think it's kind of, some people wouldn't think about CBT as counseling, but yeah, that's kind of arguable. But I will say that these are kind of really popular approaches in the UK. And in my university, we teach these two, the person-centered and the psychodynamic. And I'm sorry. And they focus, as I was saying, mainly on family dynamics and their impact on the person. So again, on the individual and their intimate relationships and their history in terms of what has happened in their family and how, or with their partner, etc., and how come that affects them in how they are today and the problems that they are experiencing. And for these approaches, therapy involves working with the therapeutic relationship in different ways, so that in the relationship between the counselor and the client, something can be worked through psychodynamically, for example, through transference, countertransference, and in the person-centered approach with the core conditions. And yes, Muhammad was telling me that you guys had kind of, you are taught these approaches. So like I assume that you know this already. And the idea of this is that you, as a client, will be working towards autonomy and self-reliance, especially in the person-centered approach, to balance relationships, to reflective capacity, and so on. So that's kind of, I would say, in very broad terms, the core of counseling approaches. Right. So then I'm trying to challenge the idea that Western therapeutic approaches are neutral or that they are generalizable, so that they can be applied in any context. And I will do this bit focusing on the person-centered approach that was kind of brought by Carl Rogers. So what I will read just now is an interview between Alicia Hilheim and Rogers. So Alicia and Carl, right? Where Alicia challenged Rogers in terms of how the person-centered approach is actually very much reliant on one way of being, which is more Western, more Anglo, and more in relation to the States, in particular to the United States. And this is also in the context of having person-centered groups in an intercultural context. So this paper in particular, they were speaking about person-centered groups in South Africa, if I remember correctly. So Alicia says, I wonder if the person-centered approach applied cross-culturally favors American styles of expressing feelings, if it has become ethnocentric. So by an American style of expressing feeling, it will be kind of a more direct way of having a feeling and letting the other know about this feeling right away and very kind of forthrightly. So Rogers responds, to the extent that it did, it wouldn't be in accord with person-centered theory, because I would like to be able to accept what is. If the norm for this person is to grieve openly and loudly, okay, I would like to be able to accept that. If for this other person, grieving is something private that hardly shows on the surface at all, okay, I would like to be able to accept that. So he's saying, which is part of the foundations of the person-centered approach, that you as a counselor or as a facilitator should accept the person as they are, as they show up. So that if we will be privileged in this way, this direct way of expressing feelings, it wouldn't be coherent with the person-centered approach. So this is what he's arguing. So he says, I think the only problem I see is one of expectation. If you are going to expect a certain degree of affect, if you expect that of the process, then that can be artificial. If the degree of affect is what is comfortable, reasonable, or natural for this person, this group, or these people, then that's fine. So he's saying basically you shouldn't have an expectation of how people should express their feelings. But then Alicia continues to challenge him. So she says, a criterion that signals empathic involvement in the person-centered process is the direct sharing of personal feelings with the group. Do you think such expression is universal across cultures? So she's pointing out that actually for the person-centered process, that they are sort of measuring, or they see empathy being enacted when people share their feelings directly and more forthrightly with the group. So then Rogers laughs, because I think that he feels more caught in something. So he says, that's right. If you stand off and look at it, I think that is a criterion. So then he realizes, actually, yes, person-centered approach does have this criterion. And he kind of goes back to say, it's not a good idea to keep such criteria too strongly in mind during the experience. It's best to be fairly naive or not full of expectations. As facilitators, we used to look at each other and catch ourselves saying, well, in my group, 3 people wept today, like in an approving way. So he's reflecting here in how facilitators of person-centered groups were like implicitly or explicitly holding the idea that if people express their feelings outwardly, for example, crying, this is a successful group, which again will be kind of more in line with what Alicia is criticizing, that this way of expressing feelings that is more consistent with the United States is part of the criteria of person-centered theory and practice. So Alicia, smiling, says, we have seen that hope can be controlling, that expectation that feelings pour out of a group can be artificial. And Carr says, that's right. And Alicia says, okay, some participants in person-centered groups share precisely that concern with me, stating that displaying feelings was almost a ticket in to their group. What bothered one participant was the facilitator's insensitivity to quiet, less dramatic styles of expressing feelings, favoring verbalizers, folks who took their emotional pulse every 5 minutes. Another guy who said he was more of a visual person, a builder, claimed he never got any airtime. I thought of the idea of facilitative seeing as well as listening. So here Alicia is commenting on how some people from other cultures, not part of the US culture, felt that their style of expressing feelings that was less dramatic, more quiet, so not speaking as much, were kind of excluded from the group or like brought to the fringes of the group. And that the people who were speaking a lot and saying a lot about their feelings had kind of the spotlight. So then that's kind of the sort of conclusion that they get in relation to this topic in this dialogue between Alicia and Rogers. So here we can see that even if a person-centered approach, which appears to be really, really neutral and really universal because of just accepting the person as they show, is not really that neutral. And there are still certain criteria, like ways, for example, of expressing feelings that are expected or that are valued more over others, even if that wasn't the intention of Rogers. Yeah. So, for example, another author criticizes the person-centered approach and its universality by engaging also with critical race theory and feminism to question the person-centered approach. So she says, Rogers' own description in his definition of the actualizing tendency is development towards autonomy and away from heteronomy or control by external forces. The first point to note is how what starts out as a biological movement to growth is now plainly imbued with psychological and cultural features. So this idea of moving towards autonomy and away from heteronomy is something that is really very much cultural, right? And that it's something very Western as well, that we need to be independent, we need to be autonomous. Whereas in other cultures, community is much more valued, for example. So maybe you don't develop that much towards independence, but maybe you develop more towards interdependence or towards a more communitarian way of being. So this actualizing tendency, which is seen as something more biological, so something kind of from our bodies, actually is very much a cultural thing as well. So it's supposedly value-free, but it's actually privileging Western ways of being. And she also criticizes the idea of being non-directive, which is very central to the person-centered approach, so that the counselor doesn't direct where the session goes. But she says how in this actually power relationships are obscured, right? So that the power relationships are still there. It's just that they are not really noticed. Right. Any question up to here?
Okay. Does participant have question? Ada yang mau ditanyakan? If you want to say it in bahasa Indonesia, maybe I will try to help you in translating into English. Okay, I think all of good, so you can continue.
Yeah, so there is no question.
Yeah, I think everything is good.
Okay. Just let me know if there is any question. Okay, so now, kind of after trying to see that actually like a Western approach, like for example, the person-centered approach is not really neutral and it's privileging certain ways of being that are in line with a Western way of being, I will speak about cross-cultural approaches to counseling. So cross-cultural approaches to counseling had kind of the good thing, let's say, that they know that people coming from different cultures will have different expectations, different ways of being a family, etc. So cross-cultural approaches take that into account for counseling. And by culture, that can be kind of a very broad definition, including religion, views on sexuality and gender, ways of living, family structures, values, language, and more. So cross-cultural approaches
Recording stopped.
Cross-cultural approaches to counseling can acknowledge the difference and challenge the imposition of Euro, cis-male, Christian, or heterocentric norms onto
Recording in progress.
and psychology. But in this trying to include others' ways of being in counseling, there can be issues as well, because we will expect that cross-cultural approaches to counseling value different cultures in the same way, but we will see that that's not actually the case. So for example, in one paper, Eun Kim recommends counselors working with Asian American people not to challenge family hierarchy. So cross-cultural approaches to counseling can be quite popular also in places that are very intercultural. For example, the United States, where a lot of Asian American people live. Actually, I'm not sure if this paper, I know it is, of course, yeah, it is from the Asian American people. So yeah, so from the context of the US. So they say Asian American people have this family hierarchy, and then counselors are recommended not to challenge that. So Asian families are described as often structured hierarchically, not only generationally, but also in the order of siblings. So that, the parents need to be respected, the grandparents, and also the older siblings in relation to the younger siblings. So they say the counselor can feel frustrated with this, like with this family hierarchy, and attempt to change the status quo. but the client might not be prepared to deal with that. So basically, what this author is saying is Asian people have this family hierarchy, and the counselor shouldn't try to challenge that. And that, that could be okay if it was about respecting kind of another culture and another way of being. But I think that the difficulty comes up when they say the client might not be prepared to deal with that. So it is seen basically that a family structure that is less hierarchical will be better, I think, right? And the client, the Asian American person, is not yet prepared to deal with that, but might be prepared in the future. So, they might grow to be able to do that. So in that way, again, the more American way of being, encouraging more challenge and not that type of hierarchy, is valued more, or like put in the top place. And Erica Berman also speaks about some critiques to the cross-cultural approaches to counseling, and thinking, what I was saying, that different cultures are not valued in the same way, and that cross-cultural counseling can make Anglo-US ways of living generalizable and superior. And when in research, for example, there are attempts to study how people from other cultures can be different, these studies are commanded by Western concepts and Western tools as well. For example, they can measure how, let's say, people in China experience attachment. But the idea of attachment and attachment theory is a Western construct, and then the ways of measuring attachment are also Western construct, and then that's taken to another culture. So again, the dimension where this difference is going to be measured is already determined. And it doesn't happen, for example, that there is a, let's say, Chinese way of thinking about ways of relating that then is applied to the US, for example. And other cultures can be seen as unchanged and unitary. For example, in what we saw before with this paper, when speaking about the Asian American family, kind of Asia is like a huge thing, right? With a lot of diversity inside of it, as of course you know. And then this gets very much generalized into one way of being. And it can have a colonial origin, and it can continue being colonial in this sense of making the Anglo-US ways of living better and having this sort of comparison. Yeah, well, and she speaks about Lost in Translation, which is a movie. I'm not sure if you have seen it, but she speaks about how in this movie, the Western characters go to Japan and they have all of this dialogue there, right? But they are the center of everything, and Japan is just a sort of background, or Japanese people is just a background, and everything that happens is in relation to themselves. So just kind of an example of how non-Western cultures can be utilized in that way. Right. So yeah, so in the next slides, I will kind of go further with this critique by questioning the generalizability of Western diagnosis. So I will illustrate that with a paper in particular. And this paper speaks about depression and how depression can be understood in the context of Sri Lanka and with Buddhism in particular. Because if you just try to apply the concept or the diagnosis of depression to Sri Lanka, you will find certain issues, certain problems. So the author asks, Oveyeskere, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, how is the Western diagnostic term depression expressed in a society whose predominant ideology is of Buddhism, states that life is suffering and sorrow, that the cause of sorrow is attachment or desire or craving, that there is a way, generally through meditation, of understanding and overcoming suffering and achieving the final goal of cessation from suffering or nirvana. So they are trying to think, right? How can the diagnosis of depression can make sense with Buddhism? You know, that thinks of life like that as a suffering and sorrow, and that suffering and sorrow needs to be addressed in this particular way. So they think basically that depression, you know, cannot really be applicable in that context. So they say, in my view, the conceptual problem does not lie with the Yoruba or the Ashanti, you know, other people from other contexts, but with the Western psychiatrists. If the Ashanti, the Yoruba, or the Sinhala of Sri Lanka were to say that certain affects arising out of a life condition, for example, bereavement, loss, menopause, old age, etc., do not constitute an illness, and furthermore, if these affects cannot be separated from their involvement in an existential issue, such as the nature of life, could we seriously say that the Ashanti, Yoruba, or Sinhala are deluding themselves and they are in fact suffering from an illness called depression? So, oh, I'm saying like a person going there.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Maybe there is one person who taken note there.
Yeah. No, that's all good. Um, so, so with this, you know, what the author is saying here is that if these people, like with these ways of thinking, ways of living, and particular ethics, like the Ashanti, Yoruba, or Sinhala people, will think about kind of feeling depressed as something that comes from these life conditions, for example, having lost someone or going into menopause. And it's not an illness, you know, and it's part of the existential nature of life. We cannot say that these people are, as the author says, deluded, right? And that actually what these people are experiencing is depression, but it's just that they don't know that it is depression. It's just that there is another framework, right? Like another way of thinking about this affect that doesn't pathologize it as depression. And then another example is Neo-Morita therapy. So this author, Kitanishi, if I'm pronouncing that well again, speaks about Neo-Morita therapy being inspired by Morita therapy that emerged in the 1920s in Japan. So Kitanishi offers the updated view that at its core, Neo-Morita therapy is a therapeutic method that resolves egocentric love and suffering caused by unwarranted attachment and craving. So that's quite different. We don't see that in Western models, right? That attaching too much to something or like craving too much something can be a problem, right? And that this more egocentric love and suffering can be a problem. But in this Neo-Morita therapy, that is seen as a problem. He elaborates that in the original concept of Buddhism, suffering is understood as not being able to control things according to our will, or things that do not go according to our wish. We suffer because we think that our bodies and minds and all other phenomena belong to us, and we try to control them according to our wills. He explains that Morita therapy emphasizes discovering a new self and moving forward with life rather than searching for the reasons for suffering, anxieties, or fears. The Eastern views of nature and egolessness, or the attitude of accepting things as they are used to correct pathological narcissism. In therapy, the focus is on the development of a self that incorporates nature. So this again has such a big difference with what we think, like from a more Western perspective, right? So the objective here is to try to release this like this desire to control things according to our will, which is well, it's so different from all of the Western discourses about, you know, that you try your best and you make your dreams come true, you make things happen. So here it's quite the opposite, I would say, right? That we will need to move towards accepting things and accepting what we cannot change. So again, this question, the generalizability of Western therapy, and opens up the idea of developing other types of therapy that might be more coherent with other systems of belief. In this case, you know, with the two examples, Buddhism was quite foregrounded. Right. Okay. Before I go into the other part of the presentation, do you have any comments or questions?
Okay, the audience? Or maybe actually I have something in mind, Karen.
Yes.
And then while we are waiting for their, their time to making a question. So basically, you mentioned that the counseling in the Western, in UK specifically, it was only person-centered, and also what else? I forget. I'm so sorry.
It's a psychodynamic.
So, psychodynamic, and then you also mentioned that the CBT and behavioral therapy is not part of the counseling. So, what do you think if, like, in the eastern part country, they are still, conducting the cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, and so on?
Right. Well, I'm not kind of affirming that, you know, because other people
Yes.
might think differently. But here, CBT can be more associated with, for example, like clinical psychology and person-centered and psychodynamic, because they are more non-directive, are more associated with counseling and with psychotherapy. But, you know, people might contest that. And in relation to your question, I think that it wouldn't be fair to say that CBT is not popular here, because it's really popular. It's just that it's more associated with clinical psychology. And maybe similarly to, well, I'm not sure of, you know, what happens in Indonesia, but CBT is more supported, for example, like in the public system. So the NHS supports more, to the best of my knowledge, CBT than other practices. So maybe it's not that different in that way.
Oh, I see. That's really interesting part of that. Anyway, I'm so sorry. There is someone who shared the screen. Hello, Najwan. Okay, I'm so sorry about that. Okay, please.
Yes, was that a question or?
No, there is someone who shares screen.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll continue. Should I continue or is there
Yeah,
any?
sure. I
Okay.
think all is good.
Okay. So my next thing is, can Western therapy further oppressive systems? Which again, can be something quite surprising, I think, to have as a question, because in general, when we think about counseling, we think about just good things, right? Like making people feel better or be better. So can counseling and psychotherapy actually further oppressive systems? And this is a paper that I have with my colleague, Baraklu, and it is in press. It hasn't been published yet. And we think about how therapeutic aims can be aligned with neoliberalism in particular. So, if therapy is aligned with dominant and oppressive systems, for example, neoliberalism, then what is conceived as a problem will have to be what is not convenient for said system, right? So, if therapy is helping neoliberalism, or kind of, which is a form of capitalism, then therapy will pathologize what goes against neoliberalism and will see as something good what can further neoliberalism. For example, Sugarman calls attention to how social anxiety became a main object of knowledge and intervention in therapy, precisely because being an extrovert, networking, and presenting well are part of what is needed to build your way towards success in this neoliberal society. So, what was seen as a problem for therapy is maybe being too shy or not being kind of networking enough, because neoliberalism needs you to be more out there, right? So similarly, Litzman, from a Marxist-informed perspective, argues that therapy, in line with neoliberalism, works to make you independent from the criteria of others and social expectations. Therapy works to foster a subject looking for independence and autonomy. So we have seen that more before as well, right? So that therapy works towards this independence, so that people also think about themselves and about they can achieve or they cannot achieve as a personal failure or as a personal success, rather than thinking about the social roots of this, or instead of having community as an objective. Instead of that, all that we look for is more independence and autonomy. And I have a paper that is questioning what is therapy producing. And Rose, that I spoke about at the beginning, speaks about how the psi disciplines, for example, psychology, psychotherapy, etc., shape subjectivity in a particular way. Like with this idea that we have an internal life that is deep, that we are free, and that we are looking towards self-actualize ourselves, instead of, for example, being the product of our relationships or being the product or being together with our social situation. So in this paper, I ask whether when we go to therapy, we only express or discover our true selves, or whether we actually also produce or generate a particular self. So for example, if I go to therapy because I feel anxious, my feeling is this anxiety, but I could make sense of this anxiety in many different ways. So I might go to that was
I'm so
probably
sorry, there is someone. Yeah, there's leaking. Okay.
yes.
Okay, please you may continue, Dr. Karen. I'm so sorry about that.
No worries. So that probably is someone going, so if I go to therapy with this anxiety and my therapist, let's say, asks me a lot about my relationships with my family and how it was when I was growing up, maybe I will make sense of my anxiety in that way, right? So my anxiety had to do with my parents' expectations on myself, for example, right? But if instead of that, I don't know, like I will go to another therapist, or maybe I will just be part of a social movement, I might think about my anxiety as actually the product of like a social situation, or how I have been kind of marginalized in this way or in this other way, and then I cannot trust enough this society, let's say. So what is a feeling, which is the anxiety, can take shape in very different ways, depending on how we make sense of it. That's kind of my point. So to think about the experience not that much as a foundation or something that is already there and that we just need to kind of make visible, but something that is generated. Another example, if a client is disappointed about what they have achieved in life, so let's say that they feel like a failure because of, I don't know, like they lost their job or something like that, or they have a job but it's not the job that they want to have. So with that, I will think about them not only in terms of that disappointment, right? And not only in terms of, for example, their self-esteem or how they relate to themselves or how their family has put success as a criteria for them, but also in terms of what society sees as successful and what society doesn't see as successful. So in that sense, experience is also shaped in a social way. And because therapy, with its emphasis in ourselves or our family relationships instead of more social aspects, I think that it can kind of produce this individualism in the person. And so what I'm proposing is like a more critical psychotherapy in the sense of a constant questioning and transforming of psychotherapy and counseling. So I worry about how the notion of a bounded self as an individual therapeutic project of knowing and working on ourselves can make us too busy with our development that we fail to see, as Ahmed makes clear, that our striving to be happy, far from authentic and personal, can be, to a considerable extent, a social product which encourages us to be in line with hegemonic versions of subjectivity. So something that is seen as so personal as being happy, I just want to be happy, actually is also very much social, right? Like at least, like from the West, being happy is associated with being successful in your job, maybe with being married, with having a family, with being attractive, like all of these things are what marks success and happiness. So happiness is not actually something that personal, and it's something kind of quite social. So if we just think about therapy as listening to this self and the desires of the selves, without questioning society and without questioning how society can take us to places that are not that positive, then therapy can just kind of foster social unfairness, for example. Yeah, so I'm thinking how, as a psychotherapist, in what I do, and not only if I judge someone directly, but also with the type of questions that I ask, or how, my facial expressions when they tell me about something, I do influence the client, even if I don't want to influence the client. So my idea of what a good life is, for example, will permeate how I am with clients, I think. So it will be quite important that I'm reflecting on myself in that. Yeah, this is what I want to say basically with these quotes, and to try to make my assumptions explicit so I can challenge them. So, for example, I might try to inadvertently even to direct the process of a client towards independence or autonomy. So let's say, for example, that a client is still living with their parents when they are 27, which in a Western context, for example, like here, like a more Anglo context, I think more specifically, is not very popular, right? Like the children, when they are 18, most of them will go out to university and will leave the house. So if I see someone that is older and is still living with their parents, and if I will have this criteria that people should move towards autonomy, maybe in a more inadvertent way, I could try to move the client towards that direction. So I think it will be important that I question myself and whether there might be other ways of being that, for example, like foster more interdependence, that are also okay, that it doesn't need to go just in that way. Yeah. Okay, I'll just make some space in case anyone has something to say before I move.
Okay, for the audience, do you want to have any question, or do you have anything to, like argue or something?
Excuse me, may I?
Yes, thank you.
All
Please.
right. Okay, sorry, maybe my signal is not too good. Hello, Karen.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Irene. I'm not from this study background, which is I think this is guidance and counseling study. I'm actually from education.
From education?
Yeah. But I'm interested in studying the affective domain of learning. So that's how I got to know psychology, and I'm interested also to join this seminar with you as the speaker. It is a very interesting topic, and I thank you for the insightful presentation. You're not done yet though, but I have several questions though. If you don't mind.
Yes.
So the first one is it really makes me question many things what you present today. What is actually the history of counseling? Why it should be counseling like that when like human being have a problem, and then the solution is that you have to talk to psychologist or psychotherapist or to counselor like that. And I think I saw that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the counseling actually put the problem on the individual. That's how I get the impression from your presentation. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. It makes it more complicated, because when the problem, for example, in the politics, like in the government or in the system, and then this individual gets stressed out or burn out at their work, actually what's wrong is in the system. But then when you go to counselor, like it feels like you are the problem, like that.
Yes, I think that can happen. Yes.
And then it raises another questions. What is actually the definition of mental illness, for example? What can be labeled as depression or mental illness? It reminds me also about this experiment in United States. I forgot. It was popular in 1960, I think. I forgot the name. The experiment was done in an asylum.
Okay.
Yeah. And it raises many questions about what is the definition of mental illness actually. And so the last one is what is actually the future of guidance and counseling study then? I mean, to solve the problems, is it possible that human being agreed on some universal values or truths like that? Like you mentioned before about suffering and stuff. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, I think these are great comments. And with the last question about kind of the future of counseling, I think that like in what I will speak now, maybe that I will speak to that. But in terms of having universal values, I will think that might be quite problematic, because I think that as we develop different languages, like in different places, because there are just different ways of being, I think that values will be different in different places. And if we have just one kind of universal framework, I will be suspicious that universal framework is kind of held by the most powerful people or the most powerful countries and being more imposed on others rather than kind of being something quite democratic. I think it would be great if like people in the world could get to an agreement that was actually quite just and that everybody could be heard. Yeah, but I think that's difficult. Yeah, but let me go with the colonial and liberatory approaches to counseling because I think that they will address a bit of what you're thinking about. So to continue, the critiques of counseling and psychotherapy from the colonial and liberatory approaches also propose different ways of doing counseling, right? So they do give a sort of way out from this critique. And similar to what you were saying, Irene, in terms of the problem being in society, right? Krishnamurti, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing names wrongly. Krishnamurti brings this questioning very much to the foreground. So they say, without first questioning the health of society, what is the good of helping misfits to conform to society, right? So if we have a society that is unhealthy, a society that is unfair, why would therapy try to help people to fit into this society? So for example, like when we have a client that is really stressed because of work, but maybe also because of social aspects. For example, I don't know, they are dealing with immigration or other things like that. And if we try to help them to adapt to that, like many times, like this is what counselors feel that they can do, then we are helping them to adapt to a society that is sick in a way, right? So Krishnamurti is very critical of this. And I say with my colleague, what is the society to which we are trying to adapt? Is it one modeled by neoliberal and neocolonial criteria, placing, as Winter says, the productive white man at the top? These criteria homogenize and collapse the diversity of possibilities in the world into one rubric, right? So if with therapy we are trying to be like this, like the ideal of a white man, for example, who is productive and attractive and rich, and also has a family, and that, you know, and if all of the therapy goes towards that direction, or, you know, with a woman in something similar to that, then we are homogenizing people, right? And we are just trying to go towards something that actually can be quite unjust socially. I will expand on this. So, for example, Frantz Fanon, who is a very important person for the colonial approaches to psychology and psychotherapy, has a very popular book, which I hope you know, that is called Black Skins, White Masks. And he speaks about how, or he criticizes how colonial were the approaches, or are, I would say, but he's writing from the 50s, right? That from these times were the approaches to psychology. So, for example, this French person, Manoni, has this book, Prospero and Caliban, Psychology of Colonization. And he speaks about the adult Malagasy, which I think is like people in Madagascar, indigenous people from Madagascar, have an inferiority complex, right? So he thinks basically that people who have been colonized, and with this example in particular of the Malagasy, have this inferiority complex as an essential thing inside of them. So that the colonized people were unconsciously expecting a master, as if colonized people were kind of servants, right? And this is kind of our nature. And in front of this argument that tries to make essential and a sort of a biological trait this kind of sense of inferiority, Fanon argues, if he is a Malagasy, it is because the white man has come, and if a certain state he has been led to ask himself whether he is indeed a man, it is because his reality as a man has been challenged. So what Fanon is saying with this is, if someone has an inferiority complex, right? If someone feels like, let's say, very, very self-aware or very insecure, especially in front of whiteness, you know, in front of someone who has, let's say, you know, English as their first language and they are white, etc. And if we feel kind of more little in relation to them, it's not because there is something kind of inherent in us that becomes more little, but because whiteness has, you know, in through racism, has challenged people of color, or has racialized people in that way. So if someone feels inferior, it is because of that, and not because of something essential in them. So he says, when it is a matter of understanding why shipwrecked Europeans were welcomed with open arms, why the European, the foreigner, was never thought of as an enemy, instead of explaining these things in terms of humanity, of goodwill, of courtesy, basic characteristic of what Césaire calls the old courtly civilizations, scholars tell us that it happened quite simply because inscribed in faithful hieroglyphics, specifically the unconscious, there exists something that makes the white man the awaited master. So he's criticizing here how, many indigenous people received European people who came, in the ships when the colonization started. They received the European people well, right? They didn't receive them with war or with violence. And he criticizes that Europeans saw this as, oh, these people will be good servants to us, right? We can be their masters, and they are actually waiting for a master. Instead of Fanon will think, maybe this is because they had like a sense of humanity, and goodwill and courtesy. So he's again kind of criticizing these racist assumptions. And so if we think about therapy in this context, in a world that is still racist, in a world that is still ruled by neocolonialism and in some cases colonialism, how can therapy do something there? So the response to that is that therapy cannot do it alone. Like therapy will need to do this in alignment with more social initiatives and recognizing the social roots of pain. So Fanon says, in still other words, if society makes difficulties for him because of his color, if in his dreams I establish the expression of an unconscious desire to change color, my objective will not be that of dissuading him from it by advising him to keep his place. On the contrary, my objective, once his motivations have been brought into consciousness, will be to put him in a position to choose action or passivity with respect to the real source of the conflict, that is, towards the social structures. So what Fanon is saying here, right? If he sees a client, let's say, for example, like a Black client who has issues because of his color and who has this desire of changing, or for example, of becoming white, he will think about that as a counselor, not in terms of something kind of personal to him, but of society and social structures leading him towards that, right? So he wouldn't, as a counselor, try to just kind of keep him in place by kind of, I don't know, kind of accepting that he cannot change color, but he will try to bring forth these social structures that make him feel like this, and how this person, this client, can choose action or passivity in relation to these social structures. So a more kind of social activism way of thinking about therapy. And then Martín Baró, from a more Latin American context, very much influenced by Fanon and also Freire, speaks about a liberation psychology. So he speaks about how Latin American psychology, I come from Latin America, so this is kind of particularly relevant to me, or familiar to me, is dependent of North America and Europe, right? So there is a sort of trying to imitate North America, or the States in particular, and Europe, trying to be like them, trying to use their theories, their instruments, and not addressing the problems of the people in Latin America. Because all of this psychology has been created in another context, and having in mind the problems of people in another context and not the people in Latin America, Martín Baró said. So in our case, psychologizing has served directly or indirectly to strengthen the oppressive structures by drawing attention away from them and towards individual and subjective factors. So something that I have repeated quite a few times today. So psychology brings attention to the subjective, to the individual, and away from these social structures. Doing that, Martin Barros says, it is furthering, strengthening oppressive structures. And there he says, that there is this scientist mimicry, so this imitation of the North. And we lack an adequate epistemology because I will focus on the positivist part of it, which has to do with this more traditional scientific way of understanding psychology, which only stays with what appears without wondering about what causes what appears. So, for example, he says, no doubt a positivist analysis of the Salvadorian campesino, so a person who works in the fields, will lead one to the conclusion that this is a machista, so like a sexist and fatalistic person. Similar to the way the study of the intelligence of blacks in the United States leads to the conclusion that the IQ of blacks is on the average a standard deviation below that of whites. So, like if we just see things for what they appear, we don't think about what causes them. So if, for example, the IQ of Black people in the States was measuring lower at a certain point, has to do, of course, with their access to education, with the stress that they are put through, with all the discrimination that they face, with the different opportunities that they have. But none of these historical and contextual realities are included when we just measure something. So he thinks, we really need to have a psychology that takes into account history and that takes into account the causes of things being as they are. So he says that we need to redesign the theories and practices from the perspectives and standpoints of the people affected, and probably of people who have been marginalized. And it is the real problems of our own peoples that ought to constitute the fundamental object of our work, not the problems that concern people elsewhere. I have also read, I'm just remembering, of how, for example, like a lot of people from India or from other places read about their own culture through a Western lens instead of reading it through their own lenses, right? So to think about the problems of our people, depending on where you are situated, and from the perspective of these affected people. So I don't know, for Indonesia, maybe it will be, what are the problems of Indonesian people, right? And how can they be developed from the perspective of Indonesian people as well? And the connection between the personal and the social made evident, right, of how the social affects the individual. And he says that we have three tasks: the recovery of historical memory, the ideologizing common sense and everyday experience, and utilizing the virtues of the people. We cannot go like in depth in all of these, but the idea basically is making people aware of their own history and making people aware of the social structures that marginalize them, so that they don't kind of repeat like a discourse that actually further oppresses them. We'll go through this fairly quickly. So Comas Diaz is another author that, taking what Martin Barros says and other people say, speaks out liberation psychotherapy. And she thinks that for a liberation psychotherapy, we will need to validate the cultural and spiritual practices of the oppressed, right? So instead of, for example, living outside the religion of the person or the different beliefs that they might have, to connect that, like to make that part of the therapy. That the internalized oppression, so the way in which we reproduce the discourse of the colonizer or of the people in power, needs to be addressed in therapy, and that it needs to include kind of ways of thinking about the good life or a good life that are specific to the different places. So, for example, from the Andes, again, kind of more in South America, we have a concept that is called buen vivir, which is kind of to live well. And to live well is to be in a harmonious relationship between people, nature, environment, and cosmos. So it's not only that you are okay, but that we have a harmonious relationship among all of us. So maybe that, can be also like an objective of therapy. And integrating local ways of healing. And there, she gives some examples that might not be relevant in your own context, but it will be interesting to think from your own context, what are traditional local ways of healing and how can that be part of psychotherapy? So liberation psychotherapeutic relationships, feeling the client's pain, reflexive position. This is all of the things that a liberation psychotherapeutic relationship will have, and have a power differential analysis. So to think about how we are standing in different positions with our clients, whether they hold or we hold more power in different aspects, helping to recover and gain conocimiento, so knowledge, but a knowledge that is very located, and raising dialogically the socio-political roots of suffering. So again, to bring the socio-political to the room. Yeah. I think this is kind of mostly repeating the same thing. So a therapist that contribute towards liberation will need to think about social oppression as real and bring it to the room, to think about the symptoms that someone has, also in relation to social aspects. And it will also think very importantly that psychotherapy needs to be an active process on the part of the person who is suffering, right? So it's not something that we do to a client or to a patient, but something that they need to engage in. So this process involves people taking agency over their own suffering, receiving validation for their attempts at self-liberation, and as Fanon outlines in his concept of sociotherapy, being encouraged to channel their individual efforts towards community and social liberation. So going beyond the individual and then kind of furthering or supporting the person in joining or forming communities for social liberation. So this is just to finish. How could we apply this in the therapy room? And this is an example that we give with my colleague, Barakluk. So in the therapy room, let's think for illustration purposes about Josefa, a Peruvian young professional, immigrant in Spain who feels not enough at their job. So Peru, a country in South America, and an immigrant in Spain, who will probably receive like a lot of discrimination in Spain. So therapy could help Josefa to feel more confident about herself, maybe to revise how her parents and teachers were too demanding of her in school without celebrating her achievements. So again, going to the family relationships. Therapy could help Josefa, who is not an actual client, actually, it's just an illustration, to nurture herself and find relationships where she's more supported. This young professional will possibly become more productive in her work and feel happier about her life if we would kind of approach her process in a more traditional therapeutic context. However, what will remain in the dark is how this suffering of not being good enough